Well, just found out that I was muted. This is one of the not so great things about working with myself and not having anybody here. I've been talking a lot, yapping for the last 10 minutes here, and I don't think anybody really heard it. Talked about the X receivers that I wanted to see at that 1-2 turn, and I was able to get Nico Collins and Drake London, feeling good about that. Well, that's a great start for my first live stream ever. Hopefully, anybody watching this one on repeat can go ahead and jump in and just fast forward the first 5 minutes. I'll have to put a note in the YouTube comments, let me know about that. Shout out to my wife who just ran upstairs and let me know about that. All right, gonna check the comments here real quick. We Michael saying that he heard the draft audio. No, he did not. We can hear the drafters. Dude, check your mic. There he is. Great to have that voice. Thanks to everybody who stuck around for those few minutes as I dealt with that. What I talked about as my microphone was muted was how excited I am to see where Travion Henderson goes after a huge preseason game, 100-yard kick return on his first touch, followed up by some really big plays. Interested to see where he goes. Haven't started wide receiver. I'm probably going to be eyeballing the running backs here. Kyron Williams is the one that definitely jumps out to me. James Cook, who has been suppressed in value a little bit, now moving up after that 4-year, $48 million extension that he got this morning. Travion Henderson, I'll throw him in there as well. But we do see some wide receiver value falling with Marvin Harrison still on the board. Typically don't see him this late, so I'm going to throw him in. Obviously, concerns about that less than stellar Kyler Murray showing from the weekend have some people panicking about Marvin Harrison, it appears. One pick left before I am up here, so interested to see who falls to me with this one here. Marvin Harrison goes off the boards, no surprise there. I'm going to go with James Cook here, the guy who I thought was pretty undervalued before the contract. Expect to see him settle in round 3 now. This guy who has 20 touchdown upside in this offense. He has been a huge part of what they're doing there. Happy to see him get rewarded with that deal. Travion Henderson makes it back to me as well, so pretty standard to see what you'd see for a start in this tournament here. I'm going to be focusing on running backs and wide receivers early. There's so much tight end and quarterback value that you can get later in your drafts that it really does make it tough for me to want to pay up for those guys in drafts. I'll probably be taking running backs and wide receivers on my bench before I'm even looking at quarterbacks and tight ends here. Let me run through the top of the draft for anybody who missed that and is unable to see the draft board. Jamar Chase going number 1 overall, no surprise there. CeeDee Lamb going second off the board, which is where I think he should be, but often falling into the 4th or 5th pick of draft. Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Justin Jefferson, Saquon Barkley, really chalky top 6. That's about what you'd expect there. Malik Neighbors, Puka Nacua, Christian McCaffrey, Brian Thomas Jr. I was happy to get Nico Collins at 11. I've got him a little bit higher than that. I actually prefer Drake London to Nico Collins in a vacuum, but I know that I can usually get London with that second pick. So I took Nico Collins first. Amon St. Brown, not on my radar at that pick, but I know a lot of other people are taking him. Devon Achane would have been a fine pick at 14, but more than happy to get Drake London, a guy who I have ranked as my wide receiver 7. Brock Bowers, Ashton Jinty, A.J. Brown, Chase Brown, really moving up draft boards now, going in the top half of round 2. I have Chase Brown ahead of Derrick Henry in my rankings. I think this is one of the first drafts I've seen where it's actually worked out that way. Bucky Irving, Lad McConkey, Jonathan Taylor, Trey McBride, and Josh Jacobs to close out round 1. Going into round 3 here, we've got T. Higgins and Omarion Hampton. Omarion Hampton has been a big mover. However, now I think that we might have overcorrected a little bit, pushing him all the way into round 2 after the Najee Harris injury. But now with Najee Harris back at camp, Rashawn Slater presumed to be out for the year. Omarion Hampton definitely is going to fall a little bit in drafts. I think more of that early 3rd to mid 3rd makes a little bit more sense. And if he settles in at that range, I'll be drafting him a lot more than I was at the end of round 2. Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Tyreek Hill on a little wide receiver run there. Lamar Jackson, first quarterback off the board, going before Josh Allen. Kind of surprising to see. George Pickens in round 3. Some people might see that as a reach, but if you got the belief there, he's not going to make it back to you in round 4, so I don't hate that pick. Kyron Williams is who I really wanted with that late 3rd pick, but didn't make it back to me. Then Josh Allen goes off the board. Marvin Harrison. I took James Cook with the 3rd pick. Xavier Worthy and DJ Moore around the turn, and then Travion Henderson back to me, a guy who might feel like a little bit of a reach, but I would be more than happy to take there, given the potential upside. I think him finishing as a top 5 running back is well within the range of outcomes. Anybody who's watching this draft or has watched me throughout this offseason knows Alvin Kamara is a primary target of mine. So really hoping 2 picks away from getting to Alvin Kamara there. And I would feel very good about a James Cook, Travion Henderson, Alvin Kamara running back room. But we're going to start looking at some wide receivers as well. Stephon Diggs was kind of a cheat code for me earlier in the offseason, but he's getting very steamed up in price right now. Struggle to pay up at his new cost. We really missed the wide receiver window here. Dried up pretty quickly, but more than happy to take Alvin Kamara here as an RB3. Looking at some of the other receivers, Chris Godwin, not crazy about that cost. Stephon Diggs might have to settle in there. I am looking at this upside down. All right, so let's go with Ricky Pearsall here. I do like Stephon Diggs. He's been getting some really good buzz out of camp, but at the end of the day, Ricky Pearsall is healthy. Stephon Diggs is coming back. Also, a lot of that early offseason camp hype that we were getting about Stephon Diggs looking like his old self, that has cooled off a little bit, and it's not crazy to see that. I mean, we saw this with Cam Akers, and we saw this with J.K. Dobbins, guys who came back from injuries and looked phenomenal in their first couple of weeks back, and then kind of cooled off as the season progressed. It looks like we might be seeing something similar with Stephon Diggs here. There's some other Patriots receivers that we can get a little bit later in drafts that I'm equally as excited about. So let's run through this one more time, just looking at my first handful of picks here. Nico Collins and Drake London at 11 and 14. Then we went on a little running back tear here with James Cook, Travion Henderson, and Alvin Kamara. Reminder, drafters is full PPR. So James Cook, Travion Henderson, and Alvin Kamara, all big-time pass catchers, which makes me really prefer them in this format. And then Ricky Pearsall, a guy who has just been getting a deafening drumbeat out of camp since it opened up. Let's flip back over to the comments here. Football guy saying you should fire your producer. I don't have a producer. I wish I could say that this was like a planned thing where I'm like, I'm going to do a solo podcast. But the reality is I am so overworked right now that I woke up this morning, looked at my schedule and said, oh crap, I forgot to book a guest. F it, we're doing it live. So here I am doing my best out of this. Jeff Bolt saying, Dave, the Bears fan, hates Amon-Ra. I get this all the time that, me being a Bears fan bleeds into my analysis. I consider myself a very pessimistic Bears fan. I cheer for the Lions. This is just a change in how I expect the offensive philosophy to look in Detroit now without Ben Johnson. What we have seen historically from Ben Johnson is that whether it is Brian Hartline or Jarvis Landry or Danny Amendola or Amon St. Brown, he focuses on running his offense through that slot receiver. And I see Jameson Williams as a very good receiver who's been getting a strong buzz out of Detroit so far. So it's not that I think Amon St. Brown is going to fall off a cliff dramatically or not, be a good player. But where he's getting drafted right now is the consensus wide receiver 5. I have him as my wide receiver 11, and I don't want to invest in an early pick in a guy who can't exceed his ADP. So for me, I've talked a lot about Jameson Williams this year. I think if you just shave a little bit of that target share off of Amon St. Brown, put that in Jameson Williams' favor, he has an easy path to being the more valuable player in fantasy football. Buddy Keith Mock, who would you pick at the 7th spot? Keith is my good friend in my home league who is picking 7th this year in our draft, not giving him any help that he doesn't need. Love the 49ers potential. Of course, one of the things that I really like about drafting Ricky Pearsall as well is it opens up for a Brock Purdy stack. And Brock Purdy, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated players in fantasy right now. He's got rushing upside. He's a part of a good offense and regularly falling outside of the top 10 quarterbacks. So a guy that will be a priority for us when we get into some of these later rounds and start looking at who's available. Jordan Addison has started to fall a little bit in ADP now that the suspension. Oh, well, Jordan Addison goes off the board, so we're not going to get him. Khalil Shakir dealing with a small injury right now, but still think the upside is worth the risk in drafting him. Feeling pretty good about our running backs. So we've got a few here that I like. Travis Etienne and Tyrone Tracy specifically jump out to me. Zach Charbonnet, another player that I really like, but with that ADP at 106, we'll hope he can make it back to us at 107. Khalil Shakir, definitely the primary target with this next pick. Michael Pittman would be a solid consolation prize as well. And then none of these other guys I really feel great about reaching for. I'll throw Travis Kelce in the queue as well. That is I did not expect to see Travis Kelce here, but that is the easy pick. Falling about a round below ADP. We've heard the rumors about him slimming down, looking a little bit more athletic this year than he has in years past. Of course, we saw the pictures on GQ. Looks great. But there was a clip that the social media team from Kansas City shared recently that I almost didn't believe that it was Travis Kelce, like just tearing down a field, looking like his old self, moving quickly. And I think in this kind of farewell tour season from Travis Kelce, we can hopefully see him rewind the clock a little bit. So I'm not typically a guy that's paying up for tight ends in drafts this year, but being able to get Travis Kelce, a guy who's still the tight end 6 last year and still has that same upside going into this year, getting him in round 7 feels like we might even be able to see a year where he can rewind the clock and bounce back to the player that he was. Got Joey right in here saying I don't have a producer. I do see Joey backstage. I don't know if he's been running these comments for me or not. Joey looks like, fired you on air there. Jeff Bolte, being honest, as a Lions fan, I am concerned and agree with your perspective. I think the Lions are going to be great because at the end of the day, coaching is important, but a roster is more important. His team has playmakers. They've got the best running back duo in the NFL. I'd say that the duo of Amon St. Brown and Jameson Williams is inside the top 5, arguably the best run blocking line. So I think that Ben Johnson, did a lot to help elevate that team, but I think that the groundwork is laid for them to still be a good team without him. I just expect the target share to move a little bit more towards Jameson Williams and away from Amon St. Brown. Got a best ball call saying screwing off at work. Here's a like. Appreciate the like. Yes, if you're watching on YouTube, give me a thumbs up. Help us get some more people watching this. And then that'll catch us up to the comments. So let's flip back over here. We still have Michael Pittman sitting in the queue, a guy that I would be happy to get at 107 if he makes it back to us. Going to throw Tyler Warren in here as well and Colston Loveland. We already paid up for Travis Kelce. I do like 3 tight end builds on drafters, but because I got Kelce, if I'm able to get one of these high end, technically low end tight end ones, I'm looking at them as guys who could really outperform their ADP, though. We've seen what Brock Bowers did last year. Sam Laporta did a couple of years ago, what Kyle Pitts did 4 years ago. Rookies can take the league by storm as tight ends. Tyler Warren could be number one on his team in targets. Colson Loveland is a guy that we've heard just a mismatch nightmare throughout camp so far. So even though I typically lean towards the 3 tight end builds, if I can get Travis Kelce and one of Tyler Warren or Colson Loveland, would feel pretty good about that. Both of the bye weeks match up as well. So we wouldn't even be looking at a 3rd tight end there. Let's flip back over to the wide receivers. Jaden Higgins has been getting some good buzz as his Christian Kirk, nicknamed the Slot Demon with his new team, the Texans. Keenan Allen really getting steamed up in ADP right now. We see that moving up to 128 going in round 11. This was a guy 2 weeks ago that we were getting in round 16. It looks like that edge, unfortunately, has been dulled. We're going to throw Zach Charbonnet and Joe Mixon in the queue as well. We'll talk about them if we make either of those picks. Zach Charbonnet, I think, one of the best values out there. And Joe Mixon, a guy that I didn't expect to be drafting much of, but now he has just been pushed so far down draft boards that I think we've taken a lot of the risk out of there. I'm willing to start mixing some Joe Mixon in every now and then. Let's go ahead and get caught up on some of these picks through round 9. Michael Pittman went off the board, a guy that we would have really liked at 107. Bo Nix, Cooper Kupp, Rashid Shaheed. Tyler Warren would have liked him as well, but we're not going to get that. Baker Mayfield, Evan Ingram, Caleb Williams, Jaden Higgins, and now David Njoku. So a few players out of our queue, but still feeling okay with the guys available. I'm going to take Zach Charbonnet here. Looking at this drafter from the 12th spot, he's only got 2 running backs, so I'd be worried about Charbonnet not making it back to us. Ken Walker is back at practice today dealing with this foot soreness, but he missed 4 or 6 games last year, 2 games in each of the seasons prior. And in these best ball tournaments, that's all you're hoping for, is that Zach Charbonnet can get 1 or 2 spot starts in the games that he has started last year, averaging 17.6 points per game. That would have been 5th among all running backs last year, and more than happy to get Colston Loveland here. Caleb Williams did already go off the board at pick 104, so we're not going to be able to get that stack, but feeling really good about a strong tight end room with Travis Kelce and Colston Loveland here. I'm going to go ahead and, maybe should have paid up for Brock Purdy here, but there's just so much value that can be had late that I'm not overly concerned about reaching for quarterbacks this year. Michael Penix, CJ Stroud, both targets that we can make with our next picks as well. So let's go ahead and start throwing some guys in the queue here. I talked about another late Patriots receiver that I like, so we'll take Drake May now, even if we don't have any other Patriots there, knowing that Demario Douglas is one of my favorite late round picks. JJ McCarthy is an interesting one because all of his pass catchers are going off the board before he does. So we already saw Jordan Addison get drafted. Obviously, Justin Jefferson, a first-round pick. TJ Hawkinson drafted as well. So if we're playing this game where we want to build stacks, you can't take JJ McCarthy and then get the backdoor stack unless you're interested in a Jalen Naylor or something like that, which I am not. So I will let somebody else take JJ McCarthy. Jared Goff, a guy that I don't really have much interest in. And then with this next pick coming up, 133, we're still in play for Justin Herbert, Jordan Love. You can pair up with a late Romeo Doubs. I like that. And Herbert's a guy that I think has some standalone value. Of course, we like the stacks, but there are so many pass catching options in Los Angeles this year that he can simply just be okay on his own, and you can live without the stack. And then, of course, since we paid up for Nico Collins, CJ Stroud will throw him in the queue as well. Looking at some of the guys that can make it back to us, I'll throw Keenan Allen in here. I haven't seen him fall past ADP, but it does feel like he's probably been pushed up a little bit higher than he should. If I can take these 133 and 134 picks and work out a Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen stack, I'd feel great about that. We'd need both of these guys to fall a little bit below ADP, but we'll see how that shakes out. Brandon Ayuk now, with the word that he might not be available until week 6. I don't want to say he's off my board, but when I hear should be back by week 6, what I'm really interpreting is we'll probably be back by week 8 and might not be ready to play at 100% until week 10, might not be 100% at all this year. So he's a guy that I am okay just passing on. Trey Harrison, early offseason favorite of mine. Starting to get a little bit concerned with the additions of Keenan Allen now. Also hearing about his drops. It sounds like he might be the odd man out even in 3 wide receiver sets. So I've cooled off on drafting him a little bit. Romeo Doubs, will throw him in here in case we're able to get that CJ Stroud Doubs stack with the next couple of picks. But quarterbacks are flying off the board, as we typically see in these middle rounds. Since the start of round 8, we've seen Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, Justin Fields, Caleb Williams, Baker Mayfield, Brock Purdy, Drake May, Justin Herbert, and now Jared Goff, all going off the board. So hope to get one of Love or Stroud with these next pick, or we will be on full tilt. Trevor Lawrence is a guy that I'm happy to pay up for, but usually like to have one of Brian Thomas Jr. or Travis Hunter if I make that pick. Jordan Love goes off the board there, so we're not going to be able to make that work. Officially on wait for CJ Stroud. a guy that I haven't drafted a ton of, but with the Nico Collins pick in round 1, we like to have that stack. And of course, can look at some other options later as well if we want to add on a Dalton Schultz or something like that, just to invest more into the Houston offense. We'll throw Michael Penix in here as well, with the Drake London. And I think at this point, I have kind of waited longer than I'm comfortable on quarterback. So we'll be reaching a little bit for Penix if he makes it back to us with this next pick. But sometimes you do have to force the positions in these mid rounds, and I'm okay doing that here. So Dalton Kincaid and Dallas Goedert going around the turn. That leaves us with Michael Penix. And there with CJ Stroud and Michael Penix, we have now locked up the stacks that we got early with Nico Collins and Drake London. So let's run through this team one more time from the top. We got Nico Collins and Drake London with the first 2 picks, James Cook, Travion Henderson, and Alvin Kamara. Then we got Ricky Pearsall, Travis Kelce, Khalil Shakir, Zach Charbonnet, Colston Loveland, CJ Stroud, and Michael Penix. Now, some people might look at a CJ Stroud, Michael Penix room and say that they're okay with just 2 quarterbacks there. I definitely am going to want to add a QB3 into this build. Now, that could be a Cam Ward a little bit later, maybe Anthony Richardson, but neither of these guys, which is very frustrating when you look at their athletic makeups, both CJ Stroud and Michael Penix are big and athletic, fast quarterbacks. But it's almost a mental thing that they just don't really have it in their game to want to rush the ball. So even though we know it's there and we'd love to see them plow their way in for, an extra 6 or 8 rushing touchdowns on the ground, that's just something that we haven't seen historically from either of them. Penix now a couple of years removed from the knee surgeries. Perhaps we could see it a little bit more. We have heard Raheem Morris talk about how he wants to see Penix use his physicality a little bit, but we hear that often about these athletic quarterbacks, and rarely does it actually happen on the field. All right, let's jump over to the comments here and see what we have Oh, we got a Best Ball on Call saying that he got us with a retweet. Thank you very much for that. Matthew Golden has risen from the ashes of Packers wide receivers. Golden is my favorite Green Bay wide receiver to draft right now. I think I'm going to be talking about him on tomorrow's show, actually, talking about our favorite wide receivers to draft. Has been a huge camp riser. Within the first week of camp, already solidified himself in 2 wide receiver sets opposite Romeo Doubs. So Jaden Reed back to his role in the slot, and Matthew Golden could emerge as that wide receiver 1 on a team full of wide receiver 2s. Jeff Bolton here saying Ayuk is off my board, even in his solid 2023 season. He was far from a target getter and at times frustrating. 2 catch, 40-yard games happen more than I like. Yeah, he does have this thing where it almost feels like he has just been in Kyle Shanahan's doghouse since coming into the league. And we see the flashes, we see the athleticism, we see him living up to the player that we want him to be, but the lack of consistency is very, very frustrating. Anthony Richardson might be a bit of a reach with this next pick. We're picking at 155 and 158. He has an ADP of 170. But we need that high upside QB3. And maybe I could wait a little bit longer, look at Jackson Dart perhaps, maybe even Cam Ward. But I think if Richardson is here at this pick, that's what I'm okay making. Even if he gets benched at some point, you're not taking zeros in that spot. We've got the high floors of CJ Stroud and Michael Penix to get us through any weeks that Anthony Richardson cannot play. However, Romeo Doubs falling significantly below ADP. This is an easy one for me to take. Doesn't have the flashiness of Matthew Golden or Jaden Reed, but does have a secure spot as the team's X receiver. He never comes off the field and is a big presence in the red zone. So like that pick quite a bit. Let's look at some of these injury away running backs right now. Feeling good about the running back room, but definitely want to sprinkle some more in there. I'm not sure if I want to play the waiting game and hope that I can get, Cam Ward's already off the board. Yeah, let's just do it right now. We'll go with Anthony Richardson. He might lose his starting job to Daniel Jones at some point, coming back from the dislocated pinky right now. Pretty devastating injury to suffer early in the preseason. But we know that when he's out there, he's giving you top 5, top 10 value. And getting that with a QB3 is something that I feel okay about. Now let's go ahead and start filling up the queue for some of these next picks. Isaac Guerrero dealing with an injury, Rachaad White dealing with an injury, Nick Chubb dealing with a concussion right now, Austin Eckler, we know that he's probably pretty limited. Corey Krosky-Merritt is getting a lot of buzz right now. I'll throw him in the queue, but I do not expect him to make it back to us. Jalen Wright getting some buzz as well. Will Shipley, very underrated handcuff away, or injury away handcuff, I should say. Taj Brooks, Kyle Monangai in here as well. And these are guys that we're typically going in rounds 18, 19, 20, but they are starting to get steamed up a little bit. The hit rate for these day 3 running backs is not great, but this was such a deep running back class that I think it pushed some of the talent deep into the draft. So I typically wouldn't advise investing heavily in day 3 running backs. This class might be a little bit different, and I'm willing to take that chance there. So let's go ahead and look at the team one more time so everybody can get an idea of what we're working with if you're just now tuning in. Nico Collins and Drake London to start the draft. James Cook, Travion Henderson, and Alvin Kamara to round out the 2 running back spots and the flex spot. Ricky Pearsall as our wide receiver 3. Travis Kelce sitting in as the tight end, getting him over a round below ADP. Khalil Shakir moves to our bench theoretically, but when he's healthy, we'd expect him and Pearsall both to be contributing in that flex spot. Zach Charbonnet, he's an injury away guy, but when he gets that opportunity, he can crush it. Colson Loveland, the very high upside rookie, a guy who could very well be this year's Sam Laporta in Ben Johnson's offense. Really had to hammer quarterbacks with these next few picks as we kind of missed the window a little bit early. So CJ Stroud and Michael Penix, we squeezed Romeo Doubs in there before taking Anthony Richardson as well. So looking at this team right now, feeling pretty good about it. We've got our 3 quarterbacks, so we're going to check that off. We've got 2 tight ends, so we can check that off. 4 running backs and 5 wide receivers. And with 6 rounds remaining, we are just going to focus on more running backs and more wide receivers. At this point in the draft, we're not looking for any sort of projectable volume. We are just looking simply for upside with all of these picks, and that's why you'll see in the queue Jalen Wright, Will Shipley, Taj Brooks, Kyle Monangai, guys who we don't expect a lot from, but do run the opportunity or run the chance of being league winners at some point this year. All right, let me see if I can get this fixed right now because I am unable to see the draft board, and I want to be able to share that with you guys. All right, there we are. We got that fixed. All right, we're going to look at some receivers as well. At this point, we don't have a stack for Anthony Richardson, but I don't really care all that much. His value comes through rushing, not necessarily passing to guys. Might look at an Adonai Mitchell, who's been getting a little bit of buzz, Alec Pierce, who we displayed a connection with last year, but not overly concerned about that. As for CJ Stroud, Dalton Schultz would be the only real late guy that I could sprinkle in here, and I'm not a big Dalton Schultz believer. We might look at Ray McLeod or even Casey Washington in round 20 as a late pick, but I don't think we have to worry about that too much yet. Quarterback well is completely dried up at this point. Geno Smith, Matthew Stafford, Sam Darnold all going off the board. If I can get 2 of these 3 running backs that I have in my queue right now with these next 2 picks, I'd feel really, really good about this team, as those injury away guys that felt like you could get quite a while ago just aren't there in those late rounds anymore. So you are paying up for them in rounds 15 and 16 right now. Just a couple seconds left to see if we're going to get sniped, and we don't. Will Shipley has pulled away from A.J. Dillon in the battle for the RB2 spot in Philadelphia. I've said this all offseason. I don't know why he isn't getting drafted in the same range as a Ray Davis or a Tyler Algier, one of these high-end handcuffs. He should be a 1-to-1 replacement for Saquon Barkley. If he misses any time, he will step right into that role behind one of the league's best offensive lines. And then I'll mix in Taj Brooks as well. No projectable volume from Taj Brooks, but what we saw in the preseason is that Samaje Perine is going to come in on passing downs as a pass blocker. Chase Brown is going to be the same guy that he was last year. And I think that if Chase Brown were to miss any time, Taj Brooks would just get plopped right back in. We saw him playing on all 3 downs. He was playing behind the second team offensive line, so they weren't really affording him many opportunities to make big plays, but he was doing exactly what he did at Texas Tech, which, as our Matt Waldman likes to say, making lemonade out of lemons, because that offensive line was throwing lemons at him and he was making something out of nothing, just consistently breaking tackles in the backfield, stepping out of ankle wraps and whatnot, and was able to generate some positive yardage in what was a pretty bad showing from his line. So 4 picks left here, and we are definitely behind the ball on receiver. Taking a look with James Cook, Travion Henderson, Alvin Kamara, Zach Charbonnet, Will Shipley, and Taj Brooks. We are good at running back. I'm not even thinking about adding another running back to this room. Kyle Monangai, if he makes it back to us, it would be hard not to click the button, but we definitely need to look at some receiver depth here. So talked about Alec Pierce earlier. We do see that Anthony Richardson has the huge arm. He could hit Alec Pierce for those 65-yard bombs, and that would be nice if we can get a handful of those this year. Jalen Noel is buried on the depth chart right now behind Christian Kirk, but has been making some waves in camp. One of my favorite guys coming into the draft this year, and we saw Houston at the draft double tap those Iowa State wide receivers, taking Jaden Higgins in round 2, following it up with Jalen Noel in round 3. Just a very good player who, if Christian Kirk has to miss any time, could be that slot receiver. It was just a couple of years ago that we saw Tank Dell as that rookie slot receiver really blow up in this offense. So this is more of a late season play than anything else, but a big fan of Jalen Noel. Scrolling down a little bit further, we saw Malik Washington get some very interesting usage in that preseason matchup against Chicago. There was no Jalen Waddle and there was no Tyreek Hill, which is notable, but Malik Washington was kind of working almost in the Jonnu Smith role as that very short target, working across the middle of the field, making plays after the catch. And while we were hoping that perhaps we'd see the Dolphins change their offensive philosophy a little bit and allow Tua Tagovailoa to get into his 9-step drop back and hit those deep shots downfield, there's still some concern about that offensive line and his brain injuries. And it sounds like they're going to keep him on a short leash again and just focus on getting the ball out of his hands as quickly as possible, which could be good news for Malik Washington. Ray McCloud, we talked about, there's going to be an opportunity there for him to step up as the number 2 option in Atlanta, as long as Darnell Mooney is on the men. I'm going to scroll down. I haven't seen him go off the board yet, but Torrey Horton is a guy that I am really, really already drafted here. I'll talk about Torrey Horton after I make these next couple of picks, but a guy that I just really, really like. Sounds like he's already carved out the wide receiver 3 role and is just a Cooper Kupp injury away from being second on the Seahawks in targets as that X receiver in Kyle Shanahan's offense, a very lucrative role as we've seen over the years. So 2 picks away here. Jalen Royals goes off the board. Really hoping to get Jalen Knoll here, and he's going to make it to us. Like I said, this is a guy who doesn't have any projectable volume really at this point, but the injury away contingent upside is very, very alluring. In a vacuum, I'd prefer Malik Washington to Ray McCloud, but because we got the Michael Penix and Drake London stack a little bit earlier, I'm just going to continue investing in this team and go ahead and take Ray McCloud. Let me see if any running backs slip through the cracks. Yeah, Blake Corum is one that I will definitely add in the queue. We're pretty flush on running backs as is, but I don't think you could ever have enough of those injury away guys. Jordan James is starting to tumble down the rankings now that he's dealing with an injury himself. It seems like every day the 49ers are bringing in a new running back to compete for that depth role. Continuing to look down here a little bit, Isaac Tisla has been making some noise. To be honest, I'm not a huge believer in Tisla's talent. He is a super athlete, and there's a place for that in the NFL. But if you're asking him to go one-on-one against a primary cornerback and win on a route, I don't know if he has that. He's going to have schemed up touches to get the ball in space where he can lean on his athleticism and make big plays, but definitely not a guy that I want to reach for aggressively in drafts. Going to keep scrolling down a little bit. I mean, a lot of the good edges, the guys that you were able to get late in drafts, are pretty dried up right now. Jordan Whittington is a guy that I've talked about as one of my favorite late round picks. Again, no projectable volume, but we've seen in games that Puka Nacua is unable to play. Jordan Whittington steps in and basically gives you 80% of that production, runs all the same routes. This was a high school running back who is just a monster after the catch. So you don't often see guys that are handcuffed wide receivers, but that is kind of what Jordan Whittington is. Jermaine Burton, I want to make a quick note on him. This show last night with Dan Henry, and in the show, we were going through all of the training camp news and notes. And what we heard about Jermaine Burton is that he is losing out on snaps to Charlie Jones. So there was some early off-season buzz about Jermaine Burton, but lost out on snaps to Charlie Jones and then was in unexcused absence the day after that game at training camp. He played it off as an injury, but for a guy with some character concerns, if he is not getting the snaps that he wants and then not showing up to practice, the coach made some comments about him not being there. He's a guy that is completely off my draft board at this point. Kevontae Turpin, we talked about him at length on last night's show as well. Another player with one of the few guys I think that you can still get late in drafts that has a lot of upside. We've talked so much this offseason about how bad this running back room is going to be in Dallas. Though you got Miles Sanders, Jaden Blue, and Javonte Williams. Nobody is really emerging from the pack. I see a world where Kevontae Turpin becomes that guy that they can start feeding on end arounds and jet sweeps and hitting out in the flat to make big plays after the catch. This was a 4.3 speed guy. Didn't get drafted in the NFL because of some size concerns, but has been in the league for a couple of years now, has flashed his abilities as a kick returner and a punt returner, and would like to see him get a little bit more involved on offense this year. So it's fun in these 20-round drafts. You really have to think outside the box and look at some players that probably aren't on your radar in other drafts. Kevontae Turpin, definitely one of those guys for me. I will actually move him ahead of Jordan Whittington. But if we can finish these last 2 picks with 2 guys atop my queue right here, Blake Corum and Kevontae Turpin, guys that both have immense upside. Blake Corum obviously needing an injury. I do want to point out as well, Blake Corum in that preseason game, he did play with the ones a little bit and a very Kyron Williams-esque stat line, pulling from the top of my head, but I believe it was 9 carries for 34 yards and 2 touchdowns. So inefficient running, not a lot of yards per attempt, but he was able to plow into the end zone twice. And that's exactly what we want to see from a Sean McVay running back. Also, there was some buzz about Jarquez Hunter earlier in the offseason. That has cooled off a little bit, and all reports out of LA are that Blake Corum, the second round pick last year, has established himself as the team's RB2. So Blake Corum, happy to get him there. Just one of those forgotten guys. You see this all the time where rookies don't do a ton their rookie season and then just completely cast to the wayside in year two. Blake Corum is getting that treatment now. Still somebody I believe to be a very good player. And then Kevontae Turpin to go ahead and finish this draft off. Let me clear my voice and go through these picks one more time. So top of the draft, picking from the 11 spot, I went with Nico Collins. Round 2, I went with Drake London. Really nice pocket of running backs where I was able to get James Cook, Travion Henderson, and Alvin Kamara in rounds 3 through 5. Followed that up with Ricky Pearsall in round 6. Travis Kelce falling below ADP. Not a guy I'm aggressively targeting this year, but sometimes the value is just too good to pass. Followed that up with Khalil Shakir, Zach Charbonnet, and then Colston Loveland to close out the tight end room. Travis Kelce and Colston Loveland. That's a fun tight end room. You got a little bit of floor with Kelce and a little bit of a ceiling with Loveland. I like the way that shook out. Wouldn't surprise me if one of those guys ends up in my flex spot every now and then. We really hit that quarterback pocket in the middle round. CJ Stroud, Michael Penix, and Anthony Richardson got a Romeo Doubs falling way below ADP, which we expect the Packers to be a better team this year. And this is a guy with double-digit touchdown upside. Will Shipley and Taj Brooks, 2 injury-away running backs. Followed that up with another guy a couple rounds later in Blake Corum, another injury-away running back. And then Jalen Noel and Ray McLeod, those are guys that work with the quarterbacks that we drafted, just getting the double stacks with both of those guys. And then, of course, in round 20, who I just talked about, Kevontae Turpin. So we'll see how the rest of this one shakes off. Got a question here from Jeff Bolt saying, I have a question. 2 years ago at this time, I was paying attention to the experts. Would I have had Puka with my last pick versus battling with week 1 waiver wire claims? If yes, are there any Pukas in 2025? I really don't like pat myself on the back too hard, but if you look back at those rankings from 2023, I was higher on Puka Nacua than anybody else in the fantasy football industry. I had him on about 18% of my rosters that year. He was a guy that I was drafting pretty regularly in the final rounds. This year, if I had to pick one guy that I think could be this year's Puka Nacua, which if we're being honest, we're probably never going to have another this year's Puka Nacua, a guy who was a day 3 pick who came out with, I believe, I want to say 20-something targets in his first 2 weeks. But I mentioned his name a little bit earlier. Torrey Horton is a guy that I really, really like. And when I'm looking for day 3 wide receivers who can make an impact, there's 2 things that I'm looking for. Guys who fell because of injury concerns and guys who fell because of character concerns. And when you look at the character concerns, that's where we come across Tyreek Hill, Antonio Brown, and Stephon Diggs. All fell to day 3 for character concerns. Torrey Horton, by all reports, is a great guy, fantastic character, but he fell because of a knee injury that he suffered in October. Tore his LCL and actually ripped the hamstring off the bone as well. That happened in October, and he was still able to show up to the combine in March and run a 4.41. Now, the rumors are that he has already beat out Marquez Valdes-Scantling to be the X receiver in this Clint Kubiak offense. And if you look last year, Clint Kubiak was the coach of the New Orleans Saints, and that X receiver role was very, very lucrative in that offense. We saw what Rashid Shaheed did early in the season before he got injured. And then in the midway point in the season, they traded for Marquez Valdes-Scantling over a 3-week stretch. Marquez Valdes-Scantling had 242 yards and 4 touchdowns as that X receiver. Torrey Horton has already stolen the wide receiver 3 role as the X receiver in that offense from Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So we expect to see him on the field in 3 wide receiver sets. But I think what really gets me excited is that Cooper Kupp has missed so many games over the last few years, just these consistent injuries that are racking up. If Cooper Kupp has to miss any time this year, then Torrey Horton has a fast track to being second on the team in targets. So again, I don't think there is a this year's Puka Nacua because what we saw in 2023 was unheralded. But if I had to put my chips on one guy, it would definitely be Torrey Horton. So anyway, I want to thank everybody who took the time to tune in today. I apologize for the early issues that we had with the tech here. This is why I do shows with other people, because when I do them by myself, I don't have anybody to do a pre-show sound check with. But want to thank y'all so much for tuning in. I will be back next week with a guest. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you then.